What's up, Internet, and welcome back to another edition of the Comics Pals Book Club. I'm your host this month, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my pals, Sean.
Hey.
Marco.
Bakugan.
And Kale.
It's weird to come into this book with this much energy.
Hey, man.
I'm just going to put that out there.
That's my brand. I'm going to get serious when we get to the serious stuff. Right now, we're just saying hi, so let's keep it light. But okay, wait, now it's time to get serious. This month on the book club, we're here to talk about one of my favorite comics of all time, Magneto Testament. So this is a book by writer Greg Pak, artist Carmine Di... See, this is Italian, and I should be able to do it.
Yeah, what's this?
Di Giandomenico. Haven't spent enough time at home, huh?
Giandomenico? Yeah, Di Giandomenico.
Giandomenico.
I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with that. Jeez. And then colors by Matt Hollingsworth. That one was easy. So, great team, great book. Let's jump into it. Like I said, this was one of my favorites. It was my pick this month, so obviously we know my relation to the book. Have any of you guys ever heard of this book before? Had you read it before?
Nope.
So you never heard of it before?
Well, from Pete shouting it across the country, yeah, but
Sure.
That's the extent of it.
I have a strong feeling that I bought like either the whole thing or a few issues of it and read it or didn't.
You might have this hardcover that I have.
I definitely don't.
Okay.
Well, that's a nice hardcover.
I would have bought it when it was coming out. But for some reason, I couldn't remember. Like, I couldn't remember exactly everything, but then I also remembered it as if I had read it 100 times. It's kind of weird.
Okay.
I'll explain more once we start really diving in.
Sure. What about you, Mark?
I'd heard of it, but I'd not read it. I didn't know who was on it. Didn't know what it was about. I've heard of it.
All right, cool. So, Sean, why don't we start with you? What were your spoiler-free thoughts on the book?
I feel like I've read this before, and the reason I feel that way is because it's really generic. It didn't do anything particularly special or unique. I didn't feel it didn't use Magneto in a way that felt true to his character. It didn't like try to. It said something about him, but not anything that's special to him. Like any person who comes out of that situation would be changed by it. So if this wasn't Magneto, it would be anybody. This doesn't need to be a Marvel comic. It doesn't need to star Magneto. It could just be whatever. And because there's not even an inkling of the Eric Lensher that we know and love in this book. So I don't even know why it needed to be a Magneto book other than no one would buy it if it wasn't.
I actually had a similar feeling finishing issue 5, where I was like, okay, like that was a good story. That was, it said what it needed to say, but I didn't feel like it was specific to Magneto, let alone an X-Men.
Right.
And I think that like it didn't negatively impact the book for me, but I think it lessened the fact that it was like a Magneto book. I appreciate, what they did with the story and the facts and all that stuff, but as a story, it's fine. As a comment on, I didn't know his name was Max. I thought his name was Eric. I was confused by that, which we'll get into.
They just
but
decided to change his name.
But for what it does for Magneto, I don't think it elevates the character necessarily.
What about you, Kale?
Yeah, I'm actually not too far off from Sean and Marco. I think honestly, even by the time I got to the end of it, the fact that it is a Magneto story kind of took bits and pieces away from it for me.
Okay, I'm interested to pull on that.
It's not as interesting as you want it to be.
Well, that's okay. Fine. So, all right, let's jump into the spoiler full section then. Kill, do you want to expound on that at all?
So this is gonna probably come across as callous, given that it's a book about the Holocaust. But like, I feel like if you're gonna make a book about a character whose whole thing is magnet powers, the fact that you don't show him really using the magnet powers to do anything is kind of a waste of that character. Mm-hmm. I get that it's to show where he comes from and why he is who he is, but I feel like that could have been done even if you did a story about one of Magneto's contemporaries, somebody who survived alongside him or something. Like, the fact that this was a Magneto story felt wasted.
Okay, yeah, like that there's not enough. And Sean made that point too, right? That there's not enough of the character that we know for it to feel like you're getting enough out of that.
I struggle with that for a minute because, like, if you guys remember, I think it's in the first X-Men film, Magneto, it shows Magneto in the concentration camp or whatever, and he does something.
Yes, I love that scene.
And it sort of said more to me about Magneto than this did.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think to Kale's point, like, him not using his powers affected it for the story for the character. Like, for example, when his parents are killed, I think in issue 2 or 3, they're being shot at. I'm like, oh, cool, this is what's gonna come out, and it didn't happen. Like, his powers, he was gonna block them, he was gonna do something, deflect them, whatever, and that didn't happen. It didn't manifest itself. I found that curious and just kind of followed along with the story at that point. Or I wasn't sure necessarily where it would be going, and it didn't negatively affect the story, but it did temper my expectations a bit.
Yeah, well, and it does lessen Magneto's impact on the story, right? Like, his powers are really a non-factor, like they play a certain role in, like, small ways, but not in a way that's like, not in a way that I think you would, like, expect at all, and not even in a way that maybe makes sense, like, maybe it should be more.
They kept him alive, and that's about it.
Right.
Did they keep him alive?
He was in a firing line.
Yeah, in the event that you're
once. Yeah,
that you're talking about, the implication there is that, he tries to use his powers to stop the bullets and saves himself, but not anybody else.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even get that.
It's also kind of implied that, like, because his father.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure his father pushed him.
Yeah, that's why
he survived.
Right, that was my understanding. Like, I didn't even seem to think that had happened, that he had used his powers at any point.
It's meant to be presented, like, I think, as kind of ambiguous there.
I thought the point of that sequence was to say, hey, you expect he's going to use his powers right now, but this is a real thing that happened, and no one had powers there.
Right.
So,
sure, yeah.
And I thought that was powerful, but I was like, cool, but I'm here for Magneto.
Yeah, right. It's like it's done at the expense of Magneto, I think, kind of.
Yeah, for me, that scene was like, it was. I took it as, like, this is the first time his powers are manifesting, and so he had no control over it. So it just, in the blink of an eye, kept him alive, and then whatever else happened.
Yeah, and I mean,
and that's the Magneto we get.
In the art, there's definitely, like, it's being shown that, like, it's supposed to look like he's doing something, and it's kind of like a, I think that Sean and Marco are correct that you're kind of supposed to think that it might have been more his father than him, but I think you're supposed to have that question.
See, I thought that they made the when he's like in the very first issue where he's like, oh, he has this touch with his fingers.
Right.
Like, I thought that was a bit more
Yeah.
related to actually him being, he has these powers, he's touching metal, he can form it really well. I thought that was an implication there.
It definitely,
but then,
I think, is as well.
And I thought that would continue to play out, but it kind of died there.
Yeah, it's something that upon rereading it, I do wish that it had been developed more as the story went on, rather than, because like I think it's fine to have them be, especially in the earlier issues, right? To have it be really subtle because he's younger, and that kind of makes sense, right? Like that's how mutant powers tend to manifest. But like as you get into the later issues, and he's like a teenager and like an 18-year-old, or almost 18, he lies, but he's getting older and older as the book progresses, and like you kind of want to see it come into play a little bit more, right? Like, and to show that like maybe his powers are what kept him alive, But I think that, to Sean's point, it's the book really, really does a great job of focusing on like historical accuracy, and I think that is kind of at the expense of Magneto as a mutant character, right? And as a character who could have more agency than the average, person in this scenario.
Can you guys think of another instance of a story like this where we have a well-established, I guess, superhero character in a situation of a story similar to this? Obviously, maybe not necessarily the Holocaust, but
What do you mean, like a real life scenario?
yeah, where the character is, yeah, I guess a real life scenario, sort of. The only one I can really think of is I don't know if you guys read it. I think it's I want to say it was called Unstable Molecules. It was a Fantastic Four story, but it just turned out that it was a real life Fantastic Four story where they were all just kind of shitty.
Like you mean like based on a comic book story based on real events,
but with superheroes,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're trying to like establish here.
Yeah, not necessarily real events, but something that's supposed to be sort of real, I guess.
Okay.
So like in Unstable Molecules, the Fantastic Four are presented just as a family. And I think they did. It's been a while since I read it, but I think they went to space, and Sue has an affair with Ben, and it's a whole thing, and it's just not very good.
Jesus
because they're not the Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe not necessarily like that, but within the context of potential real events, Submariner: The Depths by Peter Milligan and Asad Ribic, like that is a story based out in like the 40s. There's an explorer who tries to go and save this ship in the Mariana Trench, and the Submariner kind of is this looming figure throughout, but it focuses more so on the crew and them turning mad.
I mean, I feel like there's a bunch of stories. Like there's the one, I don't know if this fits your criteria necessarily, but there's the one where Spider-Man is saving people during 9/11. Wolverine during World War One.
Yeah.
He doesn't really use his powers there. Those are the only things I can really think of, but I'm not sure if that really speaks to your point.
Yeah, not quite. I guess my point from this question is sort of leads to another question, which is there a place for superheroes in these kind of situations? Because for me, the thing I sort of came out of it with was like, if you find out you have metal powers and you don't do anything in the Holocaust, that's not realistic. Like, to be fair, he doesn't find out. Like, that's not what I'm saying. He doesn't find out he has his magnet powers or whatever in this story, but
I think that what I came away with was, man, Magneto like sucks because he didn't do anything, and then I know he couldn't. I know he didn't have mastery over his powers or anything, but for me, in my mind, the idea of Magneto is he is a disenfranchised person from almost the word go, who then develops control over every situation that he's in and the ability to take over and refusing to allow that to ever happen to anyone of his kind ever again. And so I like that. But this story divorces him from his mutantdom, and his mutant powers and his being a mutant is so integral to who he is that I don't feel like you can just take that out of the equation. I understand he's still Jewish, and so he's still a minority, and this is a horrific situation. But I think that if you say, okay, well, here he is as a mutant, picture the story ending with him realizing his powers in a critical moment. Maybe they're going to kill Magda or something like that.
I mean, it could be during the escape, right?
Sure.
Like they're like, we have 3 guns, and how are we going to escape? And he uses his powers.
Yeah. So he uses his powers, and all of a sudden, he's just murdering these Nazis.
Yeah.
That changes the history. And I understand that they wanted to present it historically accurate, but there were no mutants in real life. So you can't tell a Magneto story, strip him of his mutantdom, and still have it be a Magneto story. But you also can't tell the Magneto story without changing history. So that makes this a weird duck in that regard.
I'm really glad you made that point, Sean, and I'm going to take it back over here because it ties into something I wanted to talk about. So I have the collected version of the book that they published after it was complete, and it has footnotes, and it has a bunch of background about the historical research that went into crafting the book, right? And it actually has it cites every events in issue page by page, and explains where all of the inspiration for these events come from. Right. And I think that, again, this is a book that when I read it when I was much younger, it really, really left an impression on me. And rereading it, I still really enjoy it. But I think that, Sean, you hit the nail on the head with the odd duck comment, where I think that the amount of historical research that goes into it to the letter, right? Like things as minute as that scene where there's the guy who does the neck slit thing when Max is in the car. Or it gets put on the train, and that is something that was referenced from a book, So it's dozens of people's accounts, and I think in its effort to be a really kind of holistic view at the experience of a Jewish person experiencing the Holocaust, it's very effective, and I think that it does a lot of that stuff really well. But that's kind of at the expense of making it a story that's really about Magneto. But I think at the same time, I think it's still useful as a touchstone for understanding Magneto on some level, in terms of even if you have problems with some of the execution of how he's an actor or how his powers are implemented, the idea of this as representative of his experience or what his experience in the Holocaust would have been like, and thinking about that through the context of the books that we're reading now and how that informs his experience is something that I did still I think there's you can get something out of it in that way, even if there is kind of missed opportunity in terms of really making it feel like it's more connected to the character in a way that it should be.
I definitely feel like I got a semblance of that, using the character to be able to touch on these moments and these experiences and be able to really communicate that. But I think what I ended up leaving with was more questions, and specifically was okay, but then how did he get his powers? How did he get this anger? How did he ultimately become that character? Because I felt that this book didn't answer those for me. Whereas as I started getting into it, I'm like, oh, cool. I'm gonna find out. Outside of, obviously, he was in this. He experienced the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz. He was experiencing these events. But where did where did the character then go from that to become the character that we know is, I think, the disconnect for me.
So something I also wanted to pull on there is in the backup when Pak is talking about how they wanted to, as much as the goal was to like be historically accurate to the period, they also really wanted to try and connect it as much to Magneto's real life history as possible. You know, from a lot of the groundwork that was done, you know, in the original setting up of his backstory in the X-Men books. And one of the things that I saw from like going and digging and trying to get some context on stuff that I hadn't read since I was a teenager, was that his mutant powers didn't manifest until like he was in his, I think like his mid-20s or like late 20s when he was married to Magda, and like they had a family, his powers manifest, and then like she leaves him, and then that kind of sets him on the path to become the Magneto that we know. And then that's the backstory of the character, right? So it's interesting that like I guess that doesn't come up because like canonically speaking, right? Like trying to fit this into the canon in some way, like as a young man, he didn't have any powers, you know, and like he was just a powerless kid. So you ask like, where does his anger come from? Right fucking there, man. Right? Like imagine, to Sean's point, that you went through all this and this was your life experience, and you know almost everyone you've ever cared about dies, and then all of a sudden you find out that you have this power, and you know, and then you start seeing mutants being treated in the same way that you were and that your people were when you were a Holocaust survivor, or you know, victim, not a survivor then at the time. And I think it totally makes sense, right? It's a very, you can connect those dots without this book having to do that, because I think this is like based on that slice of his life, not his life. But I don't think that's not a valid criticism to say that you want it to be contextualized in some broader way, because Kale brought that up earlier of the idea of trying to, you know, pit it against another character in some way to make that connection more clear rather than leaving it for the reader to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, comic books retcon stuff all the time, and I don't really feel like, I mean, if you're going to change the dude's name and call him Max, you know, and you're going to do these things, you could easily switch it up to make the story, because the origin that you described, right? So in X-Men, I think it was in Dark Phoenix, they show you how he dips and he like starts to live a quiet life. He has a wife, he has a child, and all that. And then this group of people who live in the neighborhood, they learn that he has powers, and they come and they burn his house down, and they, you know, do all that you would imagine. And that's the same thing that you're referencing.
Right.
Okay, awesome. That's really great. The thing is that in that version that I just described to you, it happens when he has already been Magneto. In the version that you described to me, he doesn't have his powers yet, and I get that it would spur him on towards violence that this happened to him, not because he's Jewish, but because he's a mutant, and now he's got this other whole scarlet letter on him. But think about the magnitude of a young person who is so traumatized and scarred by their horrific experience in the Holocaust, developing the ability to strike back at the people who did this to him, the people who killed his family, the people who did everything that they did. The power of that is lost. And even if it is accurate to the comics, they changed things anyways. Why take away the bite you could possibly have by not adding that punch to the story when most mutant powers develop in teenage years anyway? What other mutant can you think of whose powers developed when they were not young?
Yeah, no, and I think that's totally valid. Although I think that it was also the fact that that's not his original name, I think, is a thing that is established beforehand, but not that this was the name. Like I know that this book established that was his name for sure.
In the back matter, they talk about how he had several different names and things like that, and they just chose this.
Okay, right.
And I think, well, my last point on this was all this happening to him ultimately led to him having a life where he had found a semblance of like balance and sort of peace, but this wasn't the inciting incident of his ultimate like anger. And I think that was a little frustrating for me because of how they used him and tried to set it up in this story. But if down the road that becomes a true inciting factor, then I don't know, it just feels dissonant a bit.
Okay. What about you, Kel? You haven't said anything in a minute. I see you percolating over there.
I was trying to figure out how this book was received, because my experience with the other Marvel Knights titles is that they're sort of they're a bit more. I guess they're a bit darker, bit more, slightly more adult than the regular Marvel line. So I was just curious as to what audiences would have had to have said, what the sales were like.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find anything, but I was just curious because to me, like, especially as you keep progressing through the story, it could have, like, if you just titled it the Eric Lencher story, I don't know that it would have ended up any different. I don't know. Like the Magneto Testament is a great title that I kind of feel like is I don't want to say wasted, but
underserved.
Underserved is a much better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think okay.
I could see this book having been really well received because this was like what 2006.
I think it was maybe 7 or 8, but yeah. Let me see. Go ahead, make your point.
2008 sounds right. And if you look at the climate of Marvel comics at that time, you look at where Magneto was even at that time. Magneto really wasn't doing a whole lot from what I can recall at that particular period. That was when they were doing the Messiah Complex and those things. Those of you who are real X-Men fans, you'll recall the 198 and you'll recall that kind of stuff. And Magneto was a little bit off the board at that time. And I think that given the particulars of the way that mutants were being oppressed post House of M, a book like this really punches that up because it's an echo from the past of what we had been seeing in the moment of the books. I mean, mutants were literally being watched over by Sentinels at the Xavier Mansion. So I think that if the timeline is correct, and it did really come out in 08.
I looked at the book. It said, the original publishing was 08 and 09.
Sure. So this is directly in that time period, and I think that it would have been very well received for those reasons. I think if I had read it, if we were talking then, I probably have stronger feelings about it in a positive way than I do now. Since then, I've read things like Mouse. Since then, I've seen Magneto's origin told and retold on the big screen, and I just feel like this is if you took Magneto out of this and you put in, and it was just Max and it was a regular kid and this was an Image book, great, sure, why not? Sure. It's still generic. I still feel like it's pretty straightforward and basic, but then I'm not thinking about, well, why doesn't he have his powers? And like Marco was saying, what happens next? Things like
Yeah.
that. You get away from those questions, and I feel like this book suffers because of those questions.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So let's talk about the art. What do we think of it? Anybody have a strong feeling they want to lead off with?
I wasn't really into it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Marco, do you have a differing opinion?
I had mixed feelings.
Yeah.
I thought that it serviced the story in. I'll say like from like a paneling perspective, from being able to really visually tell the story. I think it did a good job, but I think the style itself, like some of the facial features, some of the body language, I didn't think it was fully formed. But I do think that it from a comic book sequential perspective, it did a really good job. And then Matt Hollingsworth, I love Matt Hollingsworth as a colorist. I think he did a pretty good job. There are some subtleties in, for example, when Ruthie, she's sick in bed and they give her like the spoonful of soup in issue 3, and then her hand was all like white and whatever, but then there's a little bit of like blush that comes in. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, these are like nice subtle touches. But the art itself, like some of the inking, I think more than anything felt a little off, and it was fine. Like there was nothing I would say was overtly, I don't know, bad. And there were definitely moments that were really strong, but overall, I think it was pretty average.
I would say, yeah, I would agree with that, Marco, where I think that, like, it's one of those books where, like, I think the big moments hit, and I think some of the smaller moments are well executed, but I think that a lot of the particularly, like, kind of the facial and the body language, like you said, feels like a little bit flat, Like, because, like, there's, like, moments when characters are, like, really expressive, where I feel like sometimes, like, those are the moments that work better because they're more detailed. But it's the quieter moments where I feel like sometimes stuff's kind of it's not coming across as well as it could or should, because it is such heavy subject matter that, I think, like, the subtlety of, like, just communicating emotion well through facial expressions is something that, like, goes a long way in a story like this.
Yeah. But I do think you can tell it with body language. Like I wasn't on the episode with Mouse, but I have read it, and you can tell like when Art himself is like depressive and his father's depressive. He slouches more. There's like these really subtle ways. They're skinnier visibly. Here, I don't think that they get to a point where they're visibly skinny or like visibly suffering outside of the color. I think there are ways that you can do stuff with the form that could have elevated the presentation.
Yeah.
That was one of my gripes, was that it didn't sell me enough on the physical changes that one would go through if they were in this situation.
Yeah.
But I also felt like there were some sequences that were not too clear. Like the one we were referencing before with like, did he use his powers? Did his father push him? I felt like the way that was laid out, I understand they were probably going for ambiguity.
Sure.
But you can have ambiguity and still have, coherent paneling. And I didn't feel like the paneling was really great in that particular sequence. And there were others where I felt that way as well, where things just could have been presented better. I'm not sure why that was what it was. I don't think the art was bad. It didn't resonate with me. It didn't click with me. And I feel like you could have definitely found an artist who could bring what Pak was trying to express to life a little bit better.
Yeah, because I agree with you. I don't think the art is bad at all. I just don't think it's stand out. And that's a shame, because I think
you need evocative art for this.
Yeah. Although I will say there was one anecdote in the back matter that I did want to bring up that I thought was really cool when it came to the historical accuracy and related to the art. there's a scene later in the book where they're depicting Auschwitz for the first time, and there was a watchtower that's very famous that wasn't built at the time that they had said it was in the story, and apparently the night before printing they redid that page or that panel that showed it like right before they had to run it to print because they really were trying to be dedicated to the whole historical accuracy thing. So it's interesting because, like, as much as I think that you guys are bringing up a lot of valid criticisms and thoughts that I had while I was rereading it as well, I really do respect the work that went into it and the attention to try and be thoughtful about it, even if it didn't necessarily work out as well as it probably could have, particularly when you think about the fact that it's Greg Pak who did it, because we know that he's good, you know?
Well, I mean, for me, the fact that it was Greg Pak made it, it let me know that it was going to be coherent, you know? Mm-hmm. Like when Greg Pak says he's going to put in the work, he puts in the work.
Clearly, he cited his sources. He read a lot of books.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, you see it in you know, like World War Hulk or Planet Hulk. Yeah. You know, his work is huge and expansive, and you can see the detail and the work that he really puts in. He knows how to live in these worlds that he's made. And, you know, so his doing all this research, you know, that his name is on it, was more reassuring to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, I think it's good. Again, like, I like the book quite a bit, or I wouldn't have suggested it, but I do think that it's like as much of a benefit as that work that he put in is, it's like almost the fact that it was so slavish to the truth is like almost to the detriment of it as a story rather than as like a they actually have a thing in the hardcover as well that's like a way that you can like use it in a class to teach about the Holocaust. Yeah. And I feel like it would be super effective for that.
That's cool.
You know? But that doesn't necessarily, you know, mean that it's the best version of this story that could have been told because it wanted to be historically accurate rather than true to Magneto, right?
And that's the thing, right? Like you don't even need to have seen a Holocaust movie necessarily or anything like that. Like, I feel like you pick up what the Holocaust was just by living life, just growing up. You hear so much about it.
Public
like
school,
if you're not a denier or a psycho, you just kind of like know what happened, right? And for me, a story that's going to talk about this has to be more than just historically accurate, because I don't know any of that stuff. Like, I don't know when this building was built or what this means or that. Like, I'm not a historian. You know, I'm not into the Holocaust, right? So I accept that it happened and it was horrific, but I don't go out of my way to like talk about it or hear about it. So the story has to come first. And I don't feel like that was the goal here. And I don't feel like that's what Pak achieved. So if this was going to be, if he wanted to write his own book about the Holocaust, that's fine. But if you're going to tell a story about it, compare this to Mouse. In Mouse, what is the story? The story is not the story of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. The story is how the Holocaust affected Art and his dad and how and their relationship and all of that kind of jazz. And that's the meat. That intensifies everything that you actually see happen in the Holocaust, because you are so connected to these characters, because it's bookended by people who you've grown to care about through the craftsmanship and storytelling. And this book does not have that. Me personally, I don't care about Max outside of the fact that I know he's Magneto. And because he was so divorced from the character that I care about, it was hard to generate emotion whenever anything happened to him, because the same awful shit was happening to everybody else.
Right.
So there was nothing particular about his suffering or his acts of vengeance, because they don't happen in this book.
Right. And I feel like in the effort to make a book that kind of makes him an everyman, right? That's like representative of like the broad experience of Jews during the Holocaust, right? And like you said, kind of like the story of the Holocaust through the lens of one boy and how that affects his family. It doesn't feel as personal as it probably could, you know? Because like there's even like moments that I remember, like when like his teacher dies, right? Like that should have more weight than it does.
Oh yeah, that's a good
I
point.
actually thought that was the one moment that did have some weight.
And I mean,
Really?
I think it's good. Like I think the fact that it's executed in the way that it is, where it's like there's that series of just the black pages, right? And then it's like showing that he's really becoming like numb to things on some level, and like that I think is effective. But that moment, like, I feel like it could have a lot more weight if we had like an understanding of the connection to that teacher more, right? Or like just like getting more personally involved in how Max feels, and and how he feels about the people around him, and what they like, the fact that like he doesn't react to it is meaningful, because you kind of make the leap in your head of like, well, that was his teacher, and like they must have been close, and that must represent his old life to him in some way, and that's not even it's like subtext, not text. And I would love for there to be more of the way that they treat the stuff that happens with Magda at the end, kind of woven throughout, right? Like how close is Max to his sister? Why like why is it so hard for him to see her sick? Like you need more of those human moments, I think, and it's so it goes through this whole like kind of total look at the events of the Holocaust through like the lens of a German Jewish family, that like we don't get into some of the meat that I feel like makes for good character moments.
To that end, how did you feel about the sort of historical time progression elements of the book, like specifically like the Crystal Nacht, paraphrasing?
I did like those as like effective tools, because it sort of cements like the time in my mind. I'm like, okay, cool. Like I can follow the progression. I can understand how that affects his own timeline, where he's at, what might be happening next, what came before. It provides more context to like root him in his environment, I think, and that was effective.
I agree. I thought that stuff was good, and I wanted to make sure that I was on point with where things were happening and like when they were happening and stuff like that. And again, that is great. I just needed a core of a story to really care about, because everything else was so well done, and you can see where his effort went. You can tell just by reading the book that that's what he was focused on.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think that really does put a good pin on it there. Where I think this book is definitely an achievement. I think it's a shame that it feels like in so many ways there are a lot of small missed opportunities to make it even better. And I think that like it's worth a read, and I think it definitely has a lot of like, I think the idea of using it as like an educational application is a really good idea, actually. And that's cool, like I love the idea of using comics to educate kids about stuff that they might not necessarily be interested in, but like you can get them the hook with the X-Men or something like that, right? Like there's value in that. But I think that in an effort to be like a historical text, it almost gets in the way of just the story, and the human element of that connection that we already have to Magneto.
I think I don't know. I think if I were going to try to use a comic to talk about the Holocaust, I wouldn't use this, because it's I don't know, like why? Why not use Mouse? Why, like, I feel like
for like younger kids, Because like I think for like Mouse, like that I was is definitely more mature. And like I'm thinking, like I remember when I was in like 7th or 8th, or no, even 6th grade, maybe I had to read like was it The Fault in Our Stars? Is that the one?
Not at all.
No,
That's the John Green book.
Oh no, that's way different. What is it? It's I don't know. It's like whatever. I had to read a bunch of like books that were, like teaching you about the Holocaust through, and then you read the Diary of Anne Frank, but like then there's also like a bunch of other fictionalized kind of stories around that period that they use to like teach you about the Holocaust without necessarily getting into some of the more gory details,
Right.
And I could see it having value for that for sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying my last comment on the art. I didn't care for the covers. Looked like in early digital, early digital paint, digital paint. I was like, nah, I'm not about it.
Yeah, they feel kind of dissonant from the book matter too. Like I don't feel like they added much. Okay, so let's put final thoughts on it. Sean, why don't you start?
Sure. I clearly didn't love it. Mm-hmm. I think that there's something there, but Pak had a specific agenda. And I think that oftentimes when creators come into work with a specific agenda associated with it, you can lose sight of just the need to tell a strong story before anything. And the Holocaust is a well-told story. It's been told so many times, so well, in so many different spaces. Pete referenced, like the Diary of Anne Frank. Every child grows up hearing this. And so for me, a comic book that's going to retread well-worn ground, even in the comic space, right? Because the definitive comic on the Holocaust exists already.
Yeah.
And so if you're gonna go here, I think that there has to be a great story reason as much as there is a great, real world reason. And we probably don't talk about it enough. We probably don't engage enough as adults, and we see in real life that because of that we have a semblance of the population that they deny that this ever happened, and he makes reference of that in the back matter. And so I appreciate that fact, because I don't think we should not talk about it. I don't think we should forget about it. Just strictly as a comic book, strictly this book, I don't feel like it serves Magneto. I don't necessarily feel like it tells a great story. I feel like it's really paint by numbers when it comes to the Holocaust. There's nothing here that I couldn't have imagined in my brain, down to like the naive Jewish people who don't want to leave, and we got to scrape by and move around a lot. Like all of those things are things that I know really well, and I don't know why I know them. And the book doesn't ever do any more than that. It doesn't ever elevate higher than that. And I really, really wish it did, because if it did, this could have been something particularly special, especially within the context of Magneto as a character who this really could have benefited. But ultimately, when it comes to Magneto, we understand his story. We understand why he is who he is, because we know the Holocaust so well. So this book ultimately does not add anything to his character.
Marco?
I agree with everything Sean said. I don't know that I can add to that. Yeah, I mean, the story was fine. I don't think that it did anything, again, like to Sean's point, I don't think it did anything to elevate either the character or the historical event it was trying to portray or portrayed. It was just an okay story.
What about you, Cal?
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel similarly. I think the thing that would make people pick this up has no connection to it. And I think that even if there were just some, present day context within Magneto's life, that would do wonders for it. But it just doesn't give it that. It just doesn't go there. And I think that's the biggest failure, really. The art's fine overall. Like it's a fine book, but it feels like a book that was put out to say something about a character, but it doesn't really. And it's just kind of a mediocre attempt.
Okay, yeah. So for me, this is a book that, when I read it the first time, it was shortly after it came out, and it really left an impression on me at the time, because I had not really seen a comic deal with a lot of real world subject matter in a way that felt honest, and that is something that always stuck with me about this book. And upon revisiting it, I think that there are still elements of it in that I feel like are effective. But now that I'm a more experienced reader and I've read so much more and I have more experience, even with just stories about the Holocaust, that I don't think it made as strong an impression on me on the second read through. I think it's a book that I'll always have a soft spot for because it meant something to me in that time and it made me think a little bit differently about comics. But yeah, upon revisiting, I think it's average, and I think it's not a book that I would recommend in a broad sense. I think there, like I said, I think there's definitely applications for it. I think if you had a younger kid who's interested in comics and you want an opportunity to try to engage with them about something historical, it's definitely, like we said, the research there is really good, and I think that it's effective in the same way that those other kind of base level texts are, but not more or less so, really. It's just this one happens to be unique because it's a comic, and not unique enough, really, because, as Sean said, we do already have the definitive work. But I think this is more appropriate for a different kind of audience than that book is. So, does it have its place? Yeah. Is it as good as some of the other stuff from this line? I don't think so. Particularly, and I'll take this opportunity to shout it out. We did a book club on Silver Surfer Requiem, which is another book from this line that is really good. So go check that out as well. Were you going to say something, Sean?
I was going to say, hey, kid, you want to read comics? Read one about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Have a blast.
Let's do it.
Hey, you want to engage in something historical? How about the worst event in history?
Yes. You too can read about the Holocaust. So, thank you guys for joining us here in another edition of the Comics Pals Book Club. We'll be back next month with what, Marco? Oh, damn, I put him on the spot. Usually he's good about it. All right, so
I was pulling it up. You got me too slow.
You pull it up. I'll start vamping, okay? So thank you again for joining us here. Remember to give us a like on your audio platform of choice. Subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. If there's somewhere that you want us to be that we're not, you can bother Marco about that. We do a regular weekly comic book show, if this is your first time with us, where we talk about the news and comic book culture, and sometimes we review comics. We're reading a lot of X-Men these days, so if you got on this episode because you're an X fan, we're reviewing a lot of the major X books going on right now, so we hope you'll go check that out. You can also head over to our YouTube channel If you're not over there already. If you are, make sure you click that notification bell, subscribe, like the video, all that YouTube stuff. And go check out some of our awesome interviews. Our most recent one that I'll plug is with Al Ewing of Immortal Hulk and Guardians of the Galaxy fame. So if you want to go check that out, or some of our coverage of major events like New York Comic Con and all that stuff, we got plenty of stuff for you. So thank you for joining us. And we hope you'll join us next month on the book club for
The New Mutants Demon Bear Saga.
some more X books. All right, cool. So yeah, we hope you'll join us again for New Mutants next month. And if you want to get in touch with your suggestion for a book club, go join our Discord or write to us at thecomicspals@gmail.com. Until then, we'll catch you next month on another edition of the Comics Pals Book Club. We love you, babies.
Take care, guys.
See ya next month.
He did mine.
Bakugan.
Beyblade.
Monster Rancher.
Whatever, Blarko.